On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we look at some top stories, including AT&T chairing a new OPNFV advisory group, and speak with Faction on the advantages of multi-cloud environments for telecom operators and enterprises. Well, thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, editor-in-chief at RCR Wireless News. On this week's show, we have a featured interview with Faction to discuss some advantages of multi-cloud environments for telecom operators and enterprises. But first, let's take a look at some top headlines from across the space. Well, OPNFV recently formed its end-user advisory group tasked with providing technical guidance to the OPNFV developer community working to bring NFV platforms to the telecom space. The advisory group was made up of end-user organizations from OPNFV members and non-members. Representatives include AT&T, British Telecom, CableLabs, China Mobile, China Unicom, Cox Communications, Deutsche Telekom, Fidelity Investments, Liberty Global, KDDI, Orange, SK Telecom, Sprint, Telecom Italia, Telefonica, Telia Company, and Vodafone Group. AT&T's Stephen Wright, who is lead member of the technical staff at the carrier, is chair of the group, serving a 2-year term. The members are set to provide guidance to OPNFV governing bodies, which include its Technical Steering Committee, Board of Directors, and Certification and Compliance Committee. The group is scheduled to meet monthly, with the first meeting having taken place on June 26th and the next scheduled for August 31st. OPNFV said the meetings entail discussions on key challenges, standards, network architecture, and emerging use cases related to NFV. Also this week, a new report from IHS Markit showed a vast majority of service providers remain on track to begin NFV deployments beginning next year. The report found 81% of service providers surveyed said they plan to deploy NFV by the end of next year, with 100% of those questions indicating they would deploy NFV at some point. Showing the market's desire to roll out NFV platforms, the survey also found 58% of operators have deployed or will deploy NFV this year. These early NFV deployments are expected to focus on virtualized enterprise customer premise equipment, which has seen increased importance over the past several years. IHS noted these deployments are favored due to the ability to assist with revenue generation as they allow operators to replace physical CPEs with software so they can quickly innovate and launch new services. In terms of continuing challenges, IHS found integrating NFV into existing networks remains an issue for a majority of service providers surveyed, with many citing a lack of carrier-grade products. That concern is similar to what was expressed in an IHS survey from last year, which supplanted previous concerns over operations and business support systems. Well, for this week's featured interview, we spoke with Faction CEO Luke Norris to get some background on the company and discuss some advantages of multi-cloud environments for telecom operators and enterprises. Let's take a look at that interview now. All right, thanks for joining us in this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, editor-in-chief at RCR Wireless News. And this week, we are joined by Luke Norris, who's the CEO and founder of Faction, to talk a bit about cloud and the cloud environment. So, hey, Luke, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for having me.
Very good. Well, maybe start off with maybe if you can provide maybe a little overview of the company there, maybe for those who don't know much about you guys.
Yeah, so Faction is a cloud service provider. We jokingly call ourselves the service provider to service providers because we focus on the service provider segment as our customer base. We have 8 geographies across the world, 7 here in America. And our technology and go-to-market strategy through the service provider is enabling hybrid and multi-cloud solutions.
Got it. Now, it does seem like recently that the hybrid environment for cloud has become much more, maybe in demand is the word for it. I know at least in the telecom space, operators, I think maybe historically in the past were focused maybe on one cloud provider to kind of be their main source of cloud services. It does seem like nowadays this hybrid environment is becoming much more prevalent out there. I guess, what are some of the, I guess for a carrier in general going towards a cloud environment or a company going towards a cloud environment, what are, I guess from your guys' point of view, what are the advantages of doing such a thing today?
So I think there's 2 distinct models there. There's the hybrid cloud, which we see as an enterprise connecting to one cloud and keeping their enterprise IT sort of mixed and matched between the 2. The biggest benefit for that is mainly control and cost models. Okay. You're able to take consistent load bases, run them on-premise, and then you're able to make dynamic load bases, disaster recovery, development, and run that out in a cloud, but have them connected in that hybrid fashion. That's typically a high-speed, low-latency layer 2 type circuit for many of the major telco providers. And that typically also has a, let's call it low geography needs, i.e. they can be over 300 miles apart because latency typically isn't that sensitive. Multi-cloud, on the other end, is where we're starting to see where production workloads are running in one cloud, and then that cloud actually attaches to other clouds, and those are very geography specific because they require extremely low latency. And in that standpoint, you actually can start getting into the nirvana of arbitraging between different workload providers, different cloud providers, different technologies for the best cost basis and the most on-demand sort of control set.
Makes sense. Okay, yeah, it does seem like that being able to connect maybe that main cloud to different geographic regions is something I know I'm hearing a lot of. I know like AT&T, for instance, in the telecom space is looking to expand internationally a lot of their services. And it does seem like they're looking to go overseas with a lot of these. I guess is the robustness, if that's the right word for it, of cloud services today, are they, I guess, to a level that you think can handle a lot of what is happening in the telecom world or the enterprise world? I guess, are we seeing a good base at this point of kind of what these cloud services can provide in terms of what the customers need out there?
Yeah, so I think for your legacy 2-tier, 3-tier application enterprise, Oracle, SAP, those types of main drivers on the apps, a hybrid's still the best way, where you're mixing and matching the security and the most effective workload, either on-premise or with the cloud and vice versa. When we're talking about multi-cloud and where that's going, that really pretty much requires your application to be rewritten. And then at that point, you're taking single points of failure, you're taking distributed workloads, and you've spread them so far out that now you don't have to worry about one leg from a telecom provider going down or one particular cloud provider going down, because you've mixed and matched the actual application sort of like a peanut butter spread across so many different providers. The resiliency is built into the app, not the actual provider of them.
So then it's basically just, spread apart. Either you having to rewrite some stuff at the beginning, but on the back end you get some better resiliency. Then that's kind of, I guess, the trade-off at this point. Maybe a little more investment up front, but Absolutely. It does provide that resiliency.
Yep, resiliency and eventually cost models that allow you to really sort of pick on the fly where the best workload can run for the cheapest cost.
Got it. And you mentioned the security aspect. I know, in terms of, the general public, security is always kind of a big issue. And it does seem like most of these cloud models are, security seems to be there for these. Has that been a challenge at all, kind of getting that aspect of it up to, I guess, what customers need in the market?
I'd say over the last 2 years, the mindset of the security and cloud being a less secure model has finally gone away. Our entire business is running these workloads in a secure, productive manner for our customers. But once again, back to that application rewrite, now that these applications are really being written in an agile cloud type methodology, the security is now inherently built into the actual app. Somebody's not going to drive an 18-wheeler back to one of our data centers and just take petabytes and petabytes of the SAN out there and then try to reconstruct it. These particular apps are now spreading across multiple clouds, on-prem and off-prem, and the actual application itself has security and encryption and different methodologies built into it. So it's my rambling way of saying it really doesn't matter much anymore.
That's a good way to say it. No, but it does make sense then, I guess. And if you can disperse, your information across various clouds, that does seem to embed greater security than just because there's more jumping points, more nodes, more things that have to be, I guess, broken by somebody want to hack in. So makes sense. And is there any sort of geographic challenges in terms of kind of doing these multi-cloud environments? Because obviously there are regulatory issues in various countries that kind of come into play. I know a lot of various governments are looking to have, some cloud providers have premises on site or in country, and others, not so much about that. Has that been much of a challenge, kind of, I guess, staying up to date on terms of the regulatory side of things?
So purely on the regulatory side, staying up to speed on it's incredibly hard. You had what happened in the EU around safe harbor. You have Brexit happening. So sort of figuring out where all that plays is, it's an absolute ball toss right. But definitely each particular sovereign government has their own control set on if you have data on our actual end users, and if those end users are actually citizens in X country, you got to treat that data different than if they're Y country. You're keeping what is considered publicly available data in Germany, but you want to house that somewhere else to use it as an app, that's illegal. So there's a lot of constructs that there get mixed up, and it's very complicated. But to take another step back to the first part of your question, typically multi-cloud deployments where you're taking an app and you're moving it across, or you're sharding it, or you're sharing it across different cloud providers, those clouds typically have to be extremely close together still. And I mean sub 300 miles. Because now you have to worry about the latency and the intricacies of one application in one cloud talking to another app in the other cloud. And so what we end up doing is building multi-cloud sort of enablement pockets on the West Coast, Middle America, and sort of on the East Coast. Customers then can naturally pick the application location they want and then deliver another low latency solution to end users.
Okay, and like you said at the beginning, you guys have 8 geographic locations then where you have these, where you're housing a lot of these cloud platforms, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, and you said 7 are in the U.S. I guess where would those be, like in a general geographic region, just to kind of give us an idea of?
So Pac Northwest, then you have right there in Silicon Valley. You smooth over to Denver, up to Chicago, New York, New Jersey, down into Atlanta, and there's a couple of intermixing.
Got it. And those areas there can kind of then take care of the different regions pretty well, at least in terms of reach.
Yeah, you got it. So like in Santa Clara, we can actually connect over 32 other SaaS and IaaS providers with our own IaaS and build a complete multi-cloud solution. Where in Denver, you're limited to about 6. So it's all within what can you encompass in a particular geography.
Got it. Okay. And I guess what is like you said, I guess the ability to work with your enterprise customers and telecom operators out there. I mean, are you hearing any concerns from them in terms of what they're trying to do, or are there adjustments that have to be made in the market, or at least in the business model to kind of I guess work with what they're trying to do in the market, or I guess what are you seeing as the biggest challenges going forward for you guys and what you're hearing from your customers?
Yeah, I think the value for the enterprise in working with the telecom providers, getting a circuit from their various locations to the cloud. But once the application runs in a single cloud, typically that IaaS provider, like myself, will have much larger, already cross-connected, dark fiber circuits to the other cloud providers. So it sort of becomes an interesting swim lane exercise, and getting 3 or 4 parties to work together on where their best value prop is and where the end user is willing to pay to sort of win a solution overall. And that can be the most complicated game to be.
Yeah, I was going to ask a bit about that. I guess is there enough cooperation amongst various providers out there and the companies that you're working with to make this a somewhat seamless move? Because it does seem like, in general, again, everybody's so competitive right now out there. The cloud market seems to be booming so much. I'm guessing, there might be some tension there, but I guess is there enough cooperation that everybody kind of knows they need to do these certain things to make all this work for everybody?
I'll assure you there's not, and entirely too much of it out there. And in fact, the large value proposition Faction brings with a multi-cloud approach. Once we have the app, or once we have the data running in one of our cloud nodes, we take care of all the technology and the connections to make it work. Because there is no single one button to click outside of us.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess that makes it probably like you said, a very competitive environment out there for you guys. I'm sure it's a bit of a challenge. But again, it seems like there's so many enterprises and companies and telecom operators moving towards cloud. It seems like it's, not to say it's easy pickings, but it seems like there's a lot of potential opportunities out there, a lot of different customers out there for, I'm guessing, cloud providers to work with at this point.
Almost every enterprise is an opportunity, that's for darn sure.
Yeah, and again, I'm guessing from what you're hearing, I mean, it doesn't seem like people, even when they get into a cloud deployment, they aren't backing away from that. It seems like they're looking to scale those higher and higher going forward, as opposed to backing away from them, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we have a 30% CAGR with all of our previous existing customers. So we almost can predict linear growth of 30% on every customer we've ever had every year. So it's not just landing them, it's the constant adoption and growth that they're having.
I guess that's very nice for the CFO company to be able to have that kind of consistency there for you guys.
It makes the forecasting very okay.
That's always nice too. Well, I guess maybe looking forward for you guys a little bit. I mean, what are maybe some of the bigger challenges you see going forward in terms of both your own internal operations there, but also what you're seeing in the market in terms of what companies are asking for in the market? I mean, what are maybe some of the things we could look forward to, or maybe follow a little closer in terms of challenges going forward?
We continue to run into challenges of actually flattening networks. So as enterprises start to adopt their own SDN and getting one SDN to work with our SDN, and then even a telco's SDN is starting to become quite a challenge. And trying to come up with single command sets, API calls, where programmers can actually learn to write and sort of attach into it, that all becomes sort of a headache as well. But if we can continue to march to that and the ecosystem can continue to come up with standards, we think it's going to be a huge opportunity for us all.
Makes sense. And I know that standards issue has always been a bit of a long time bugaboo for the telecom space. I know when it comes to the software side as well, that seems to be a bit of a challenge. I know a lot of work around the open source community trying to get stuff work there, but end of the day, it seems like standards are kind of key to a lot of this. So it does seem like that's still a bit of a challenge going forward. I mean, do you guys see any sort of advances in terms of maybe the open source community, focusing a bit more on that, or maybe getting people on the same page, or is that just one of those things that you get enough people with enough different IP that they're trying to protect, just makes it kind of end of the day, kind of a headache?
I think actually, to spin all that on the air, I think I'm seeing the proprietary enterprise vendors that were selling technology are now opening that technology up to the open source standards because they need to expand to their overall market. And as they're moving from just hard selling enterprise license agreements of their software to now selling it more as a support and services contract, it's going to open up that model across the board.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Because, I know some of the, at least on telecom side of things, a lot of those guys, the work that they've done in terms of SDN, they are trying to open it up to the open source community, which, is still a bit new for the telecom space at least. But it's interesting to hear that that's kind of happening across the board too, that people are realizing the benefits there of open source. And again, it's a whole different business model for everybody. I mean, having to look not so much at selling hardware anymore, it's about services afterwards and then helping out enterprises that way. So
integration and support. Yep.
Yeah, enough business there too going around. So that sounds good. Well, Luke, definitely appreciate getting insight on this today. Obviously, it's a market that we're trying to cover a little more closely here, and it seems like, at least in terms of telecom world, it's growing more and more, and operators are relying heavily on cloud. Again, the agility aspect of it, which you mentioned earlier, is a big part for telecom. I'm sure for you guys looking ahead, I'm sure telecom is a big market for you guys going forward. I'm sure you'll see a lot more action there as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sounds good. Well, hey, again, thanks so much for the time and insight today. We appreciate it, and hopefully we can touch base again soon. Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check out our next show when we are scheduled to speak with Lenovo Networking on its recent moves to join OPNFV and expanding its partnership with Red Hat to enable telco solutions. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.